Disclaimer. To the Pharisees and Karens out there.
How dare you!
All guests on this show do not reflect the opinions of the host. The purpose of this show is to have interesting conversations, stretch our minds, and grow.
Not what we want!
If you are looking for an echo chamber, viewer and listener discretion
is advised.
You talk about extreme.
What is happening and what is up? Hold out your glass, because we're about to fill it up.
Join us as we travel and explore the vast unknown. It's a hero's journey with dragons to slay, damsels to save, and innumerable treasures to hoard. Torches high.
Look at it from a different perspective.
Mike Heiser said that basically, they felt they didn't need to theoretically beat a dead horse. Mm-hmm. They had the Book of Enoch. They had all kinds of oral traditions surrounding this event. So the writers weren't thinking of us thousands of years later being lost on this. They were thinking about the people of that time who they were writing to, and it's like everybody knows about Genesis 6. We don't need to go into detail about this.
It was written, what does they say, to us but not for us, right? Something like that? Yeah, so... Anyways.
So I think the Esau story is in the same boat. So when the writer was telling this story, he was like, I don't need to go into great detail. There's a strong oral tradition. Everybody knows. And we have the Book of Jasher and these other scrolls. It's
kind of like what I just said in the beginning. I mean, we're assuming you know a lot of stuff about Nephilim. If not, that's why we're telling you to go back. But I don't want to retrack it. So I'm just going to let's move forward from what we know already. And there's a lot of that definitely in the Old Testament, because they wrote to the people at the time, so they kind of just assume those kinds of things, but yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh yeah. So then once I started, actually going through these other books, it tied in all those loose ends and made so much more sense, because according to the Book of Jasher, it says that Esau was a mighty hunter of the field. And Nimrod, that was his claim to fame too, that he was the mighty hunter. So there was another, red flag. It's like this mighty hunter who could go out and kill a lamb and have lamb steak every night was starving to death. I mean, But so when you read that story, though, it says that Nimrod had looked upon Esau with resentment and jealousy all of his days. So it was kind of like, I interpreted that as like the Highlander. There can only be one, baby. This one says he's a mighty hunter. This one says he's the mighty hunter. They're going to clash and see who the real mighty hunter is. And the way it words it in the Book of Jasher, it's like Nimrod was hunting this hairy quote-unquote man, this beastly man. And it says that he goes out with a whole hunting party looking for Esau. And it says that he was accompanied by two of his Gibborim. And this is the Hebrew word used to describe the Nephilim giants in the biblical texts.
Nimrod was accompanied by Gibborim?
Yeah, two Gibborim. And Nimrod was said to...
the Book of Jasher.
Yes. And it says that Nimrod in the book of Genesis, that he became a Gibborim. So me with my, new supernatural glasses, I was like, so here we have this battle about to ensue between a hairy quote unquote man that with our modern context would call a Sasquatch and three Nephilim giants. And basically it says that Esau sees them and hides. And then when they get close, he jumps out and surprises them. And he takes a sword and cuts off Nimrod's head and kills him. And then battles the other two giants and kills them. So he kills not one, not two, but three Gibborim single-handedly in combat. And then it says that he takes the time to remove Nimrod's garments And it says that Esau runs back home and hides the garments in his house, and then goes into his brother's tent.
Which
and
would make
boom.
sense because now he's killing the first big king or ruler of like kingdoms. You know what I mean, right? Because that's kind of the idea, is that Nimrod became this enormous ruler. God only knows literally how many kingdoms, or maybe it was a one world situation. I have no idea, but he was in charge of everything, supposedly Nephilim. And it would make sense that he decapitates them, because in that culture it was also understood that you had to behead a Nephilim or a giant, because some of them had, culturally speaking, they said they have maybe even regenerative powers. They can resurrect and all kinds of stuff. So one of the ways was, hey, you behead giants, which is what David did. It continues to go in the culture. And even all the way to the New Testament, where they were assuming John the Baptist was some sort of a prophet or Messiah. Is he the Messiah or not? And they had to behead him. I don't think that was a coincidence either. I think they were doing that because they understood culturally that's what you do to make sure.
That's the double tap. The ancient double tap.
Exactly. The ancient double tap was the beheading. So for sure that was could have been a reference there. Yeah, so that happens, and it cuts to now go to Genesis. He's exhausted.
That's why, yeah.
On the run. He's basically, government's looking for him, and that's how he shows up to have that conversation that we read with Jacob. You ever think maybe Esau in his heart was thinking, I killed the leader, maybe I can take his place, and he was trying to take dominance, but from a worldly, secular perspective, instead of the birthright given to him by God? It was like, you know what I mean? He was trying to get the blessing before the blessing was actually supposed to be given to him, maybe. And I don't know, I'm just thinking that right now, because that was sometimes the case in the old world. You kill the king and now you have the rights to the throne. But I mean, he could have been thinking, I'm gunning for that throne, maybe, even though he already had the birthright, which is a different thing. And I don't know, some of that stuff can get conflated in the ancient times. Who knows, right? Who knows exactly his reasons? Maybe he was just defending himself. Those things we're just speculating here, but that's interesting, man. That's very interesting.
Yeah. And see, I think it was kind of like a half-hearted thing. It was like he was desperate, he was bleeding out, and he was on the run. So I think like maybe in his heart, he was like, I just want to live. I want to be saved. I'll tell you whatever you want to hear for you to give me what I need. Right. Because if I live through this, the birthright is mine. I just won't give it to you.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like he had no intentions of honoring it. And I think you see that because later it says that, Isaac becomes blind in his older age, and he was coming near the end of his life, and he calls Esau, who was his favorite, into the tent and says, I want to taste your game one more time, my son, before I pass, and I will bestow upon you the blessing. So he leaves and goes to go hunt and get some game for his father to receive the blessing. So, I mean, if he was, a man of his word, he would have been like, no, Father, I gave up the birthright to Jacob. He's the one you need to bless. So he was just like, all right, I'll go do it, yeah. And he takes off, and then there's where you get Rebecca overheard the conversation, and she goes and tells Jacob. She says, go to the field and slaughter a young goat and bring me the savory meat, and I will prepare a delicious meal for your father. And you go in and pretend to be Esau and get the blessing. And immediately Jacob is scared. He says, no, mother. He said, I am a smooth man. And she says, just do as I tell you. And he's like, well, what if he thinks I'm tricking him, and instead of a blessing, I get a curse? And she says, allow your curse to fall upon my head. Just do as I say. So he goes out and kills the goat, comes back in, she prepares the meal, And then it says that she takes the goat's fur. And for any of the listeners that's not been around goats, their hair is very thick. Mm-hmm. It's very coarse, mm-hmm. and it's just oily, and it's got a putrid smell to it. So for the people that want to read the story of Esau and say, well, this was poetic language, or this was hyperbole. He wasn't really covered in hair from head to toe. He had hairy arms, or he had a real good thick beard. No, this story tells you and shows you he was literally covered in hair from head to toe, so much so they had to cover Jacob in goat's fur to fool their blind father. And then he goes in, Isaac feels of his arm, and he's like, I feel Esau, but I hear my younger son, Jacob. And then he says, but you smell of the field, so I know you are my son Esau. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of talk about it in the book. I'm like,
I almost forgot the story. I almost forgot
he sounds like a Sasquatch, and he smells like one too. You get all these crazy smell stories from encounters.
Right. Because I was thinking of I'm like, wait, you would have heard his voice, did he? But then, because I almost forgot the story there. But yeah, he does address that. Like, wait a minute, that doesn't sound like Esau. What's going on? That's funny. That's funny, and so much there. I mean, first of all,
oh yeah.
So much.
And she steals the garments too. And that's something that I read over forever. When she puts the goat skin over him, it says that Rebecca goes to Esau's tent and takes one of his special garments and puts it on him to finish the job. I postulate in the book that was the garments from Nimrod, which is the supernatural garments from the Garden of God that was given to Adam and Eve from God himself.
The birthright itself, let's take it back a little bit. For people that don't know, what even is the birthright? Why does it even matter to talk about this birthright? How is that even important in the Old Testament? What does that look like? Why should I care as a believer about the birthright, Esau, and all that stuff?
Well, yeah, I mean, just, from the baseline, surface level of it, it's kind of like I talked about earlier. The eldest was the one that got the inheritance, the land and the money, the animals. So, I mean, you have that surface level part of it. But just like everything in the Bible, I mean, it's like an onion. And to me, that just shows you that this is the divine word of God, because, I mean, it is. You can peel back so many layers and find so many other deeper meanings. And that's why Jesus taught in parables. And he even told his disciples, he said, to you the mysteries have been given, but everyone else I got to speak to in parables, because there's so many multi-layered meta and micro truths and stories in this biblical narrative and story. Right. And the birthright is no different. So if you go back to the Garden of Eden, they are given these garments from God to cover their nakedness. And when you read that story, it's important to go back to the Hebrew, because the Hebrew, once again, it's another onion. Mm-hmm. And you find, just like the English language, one word can have multiple meanings. Mm-hmm. And you go into the Hebrew, you even have some symbology and numerology. There's just so much stuff and rabbit trails you can go down. But in there it says that covering hilbished their nakedness. So in that story it says God hilbishes their nakedness with a kanonet. And hilbishes, it just means basically to cover. And kanonet, many times into English, when it's translated, it translates as tunic. Mm. And when you go into the book of Exodus, that same exact phrase is used for the garments that covers the priests. It says in there that this priestly ephod was to hilbish their nakedness with this connonet. And Michael Heiser talks about this a lot. You have what's called the law of first mention. So when these writers use these words, they're using it as like a correlation or like a point back to a certain event. And when you look through the rabbinic traditions, they all say that they trace their lineage and their priesthood back to Adam. He was the first king and priest of all creation. And they say that basically this was the ephod that was given to Adam. And it was a status symbol of kingship, and authority and priesthood, because dominion was given to Adam. And then the first thing he does when he leaves the garden is he makes sacrifices, and he steps straight into the priestly role. And when you get into the book of Jasher, it kind of breaks it down for you and shows you that the birthright was exactly that. It was symbolically, anyways, these garments, because it was like the signet ring of the Lord of the land. The king gives out his signet because he's telling people that this is my representative. And it kind of goes back to image bearing. We were made in the image of God, and that's not a physical thing. That's saying that just as he is the king and rules in heaven and rules righteously, and you are to do the same over earth, because he gave you dominion over that. So when people, if you're doing it right and they look to you, you are bearing the image and mirroring the image of God. And that's why it says in Exodus, don't take the Lord's name in vain. With our modern context, we take that as cursing. That's right. Not the ancient mindset. What they were talking about was, don't say you're a child of God and sacrifice to hairy goat demons and do all the things of the pagans.
Right.
Because you're not imaging me, and you have therefore taken my name in vain.
Right. Right. Because the usual, or the Sunday school teaching is, don't say, oh my God, which that's not even his name, or don't say Jesus Christ as a curse word, but more what you're saying is, don't say you're a Christian and then completely live like a heathen, like a sinner, and misrepresent him because you are an ambassador, right? And so that definitely is a more accurate translation. As you walk every day, one of the lines I've heard from a buddy of mine was, sometimes Christians don't realize that ourselves, we are the only Bible other unbelievers will read, right? So if you're not walking that path in a way that represents God, then you're taking his name in vain, for sure. So we have to be careful for that. That's a good reminder, for sure. You were saying? I'm sorry I interrupted.
Oh yeah, but so when you get into the book of Jasher, it tells you that these garments was the birthright. It was passed down to the eldest son, and some people even correlate it to the order of Melchizedek. That's kind of what they're referring to there, was these passing of these garments. And I theorize in the book, and I even come out and say it, it's my theory, my postulation, that when you get into Ezekiel 28, and that's the condemnation to the king of Tyre, but part the way down, the language changes. It's no longer talking to a king, it's talking to the spirit pulling the strings of the king, so to speak. And it says, you were in the Garden of Eden. Well, there's the first red flag. It's like, the king of Tyre wasn't in Eden. He says, you were made perfect in all your ways, and that you were perfect until unrighteousness was found in you. And it says, every precious stone was your covering. And it says sardis, topaz, beryl, onyx, jasper. It's according to what translation you read. In our modern text, there's only 9 stones listed, but the Septuagint lists 12. And it says there was gold inlays and settings and tassels. It just describes this really ornate garment. And then it says, you profaned your sanctuaries. And the scholarship is, I would say, unanimous. If not unanimous, it's 98%. All agree that this is talking to Satan, the Nakash. And for those that's not familiar, Michael Heiser done a great job at breaking this word down. This word can mean serpent, but it can also mean the shining one, or the one who practices divination. So this was a member of the divine council that wore an identical garment that the priests wore, this priestly ephod.
Right.
And it says that he had a sanctuary and he profaned it. It's painting Satan in a priestly role.
Right.
So
that's important to think about because, first of all, I'm knowing that stuff was the first thing that taught me that the snake in the garden wasn't a snake, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Most of the language, like you're saying, you've already explained, tells us that it's not just some snake that can speak, because usually they make fun of that too, like, oh, so they didn't know that the snake can't speak or whatever, and it was like this ongoing joke. Oh, you guys believe in talking snakes? But it's more likely, it kind of reminds me when you're explaining it right now of all of those almost like reptilian creatures that every country has that help build their temples around the world. Peru, Mexico, all of these South American countries, even in the East, all over Europe, there's ancient statues or drawings of creatures that were humanoids, but also reptilian, and they wore some sort of garment, and they carry that little bag, like what's in the bag, you know what I mean, and all kinds of stuff. And so even though they never communicated with each other, as far as we know historically, some of these countries don't ever connect. Historically speaking, there's no evidence, but they have a lot of similar creatures that appear to them and give them technology and tell them to build temples, and lo and behold, they all have similar things around the world, even though they didn't communicate. And so I think that's the ongoing thing that's been happening since Genesis. And it's this Nakash, this serpentine sort of being that has been corrupting humanity for a long time.
And I don't know if you remember, Chuck. You remember that movie Noah in 2014?
Yeah, Russell Crowe.
Yeah, I thought that movie was so blasphemous, and I'm like, dude, they got this so wrong. I mean, Nephilim stone giants helping build the ark, and all this stuff. I mean, and I laughed, but once I started going down this rabbit hole and researching this stuff, just once again, the Holy Spirit, or the pagans call the Muse, it hit me a different way. I remembered that story, and I said, oh my God. If you remember, the movie opens up, it shows Adam and Eve in the garden. They're glowing light beings, and you remember they're holding hands. And then all of a sudden, it shows this serpent slither up. He opens his mouth, and he sheds his skin, and he leaves behind this golden, like diamond shining skin. And Adam lets go of Eve's hand and walks straight over to this snake skin and picks it up, and then it cuts. And I said, there it is. The literal coverings of the Nakash was now on Adam. And then you follow that movie, Og ends up with them. And he wore it around his arm like a bracelet, and that was like the crown. It was the symbol of authority and kingship and priesthood. And in the story, he sneaks onto the boat. Ham discovers him. They become friends, but then Noah and him end up getting in a fight. Ham has to make a decision. He stabs Og in the back, and Og hands him the snakeskin, right? But at the end of the movie, that's the key point. It shows Russell Crowe, Noah, standing there performing like this blessing ritual on the two newborn children. and he has that snake skin, and he's wrapping it around his arm. And as he's wrapping it, he says, "This is the birthright given to Adam." He says, "And now I am bestowing it upon you."